The Alpha wanted a new Luna and used his disabled son to judge, until one Omega said no. The palace, perched on the cliffs above the restless sea, seemed to grow from the rock itself, dark and imposing. Its towers were sharp as spears, its walls lined with intricate carvings of wolves, symbols of the Alpha's unchallenged power. Within these walls, every shadow could hide a secret, every corner a trap, and every word was a measure of loyalty. Lord Kalen, the Alpha of Valemore, walked through the marble halls with a measured step. His cloak brushed the floor, black as midnight, and his eyes were sharp, calculating. The people whispered of his ruthlessness, of how no one dared challenge him, yet behind his cold demeanor lay a loneliness few could understand. His heart had been hardened by years of battle, loss, and betrayal, and yet he longed for something more, something that even his power could not command. A Luna, a mate who would stand beside him, yet not bend too easily, for weakness was not welcome in his world. Today the palace brimmed with tension. The Alpha had announced a choosing, a selection of candidates who hoped to become the new Luna. They came from distant lands, each carrying their own beauty, their own charm, but also their own secrets. Some were clever, some were obedient, some were bold, but Kalen's eyes missed nothing and his heart was guarded like the gates of the palace. No ordinary Omega could ever hold his interest or his respect. At the center of this storm stood Prince Elric, the Alpha's son. Elric was young, but already known for his sharp mind and unusual insight. Unlike his father, he had a gentle presence. His body bore the marks of a struggle that left him weaker than most, but his spirit was unbroken. Today, he would serve as the judge of the Luna candidates, a role he had never wanted yet could not refuse. His father expected him to see the truth behind appearances, to measure each Omega and declare who was worthy. Elric's hands trembled slightly as he smoothed his dark tunic. He had seen countless ceremonies like this, each one a performance of pride and power. But this time, there was something different. Perhaps it was the gravity of the palace, or the way the wind moaned against the towers, but a sense of inevitability hung over the hall like a thick fog. The candidates were brought forward one by one. They moved with grace, their eyes flicking to Kalen and then to Elric. Some smiled, some bowed deeply. Some tried to charm the young prince with words, hoping he would see them as suitable. Elric studied each one carefully, not merely for their beauty or manners but for the fire within, the courage, the loyalty, the willingness to endure the trials of life with the Alpha at their side. The first candidate was Lady Selene, a silver-haired Omega from the northern forests. She carried herself like a queen in waiting. Her voice was soft, melodic, but when she spoke, there was a hidden strength, a confidence that demanded attention. "Prince Elric," she said, bowing low, "I am honored to be here. I seek not only to serve your father but to protect the pack as any Luna should." Elric studied her carefully. She was strong-willed, yes, but there was something in her eyes, a glint of pride that could be dangerous if she ever opposed Kalen. He noted it silently, filing it away. The Alpha, seated high upon his throne, observed his son with interest, his lips curling into a thin, measured smile. Next came Lady Myra, a quiet, delicate Omega from the southern valleys. She was demure, almost fragile, yet her gaze held a curiosity that intrigued Elric. Unlike the others, she did not speak much, letting her presence do the work. Elric felt a tug of sympathy for her. She seemed like a gentle flower among the thorns, someone who could be hurt easily in a world ruled by claws and teeth. Kalen frowned slightly. He did not favor the quiet ones. He wanted strength, even if it came disguised as charm. The line of candidates continued, each presenting themselves with beauty, grace, and ambition. Yet as the ceremony dragged on, Elric's mind grew heavier. None of them felt right. None seemed to understand the weight of the Alpha's world, the endless vigilance, the sacrifices, the loneliness that came with power. None could stand beside Kaelin as an equal, yet none could awaken the spark of rebellion that Elric secretly hoped for. Then came Lyra. She did not bow, she did not speak with practiced elegance. She simply entered the hall, shoulders straight, eyes bright with defiance. Where the others had sought to impress, she sought only truth. Kaelin's gaze sharpened. He had not expected this. An Omega who dared to defy his presence was unusual, bold even. It was dangerous, and yet he found himself watching her with interest. "Prince Elric," Lyra said, her voice steady, "I will not be judged by you or anyone else to serve as Luna. I will not bend to a throne I did not choose." A hush fell over the hall. The courtiers exchanged worried glances. Whispers spread like wildfire. To refuse the Alpha's command was unheard of. To refuse the Alpha himself was unthinkable. Elric's heart beat faster. He felt a strange pull toward her courage, toward the fire in her eyes. There was no deceit there, no hidden ambition, only truth. He had never seen anyone look at the world with such fearless clarity. He wanted to speak, to ask her why, but the words caught in his throat. Kaelin's expression darkened. His eyes, cold as steel, fixed on Lyra. "You dare defy me?" His voice was low, dangerous. "Do you not understand the consequences?" Lyra met his gaze without flinching. "I understand them better than anyone who fears you," she replied. Her words were a blade wrapped in silk, sharp yet elegant. Elric's stomach churned. He had never felt such tension, such electricity in a moment. He wanted to intervene, to protect her from the wrath he knew would follow. Yet he also felt the stirrings of something else, a longing, a fascination, a bond he could not explain. Kaelin leaned forward slightly, his presence overwhelming. "Your pride is admirable, Omega," he said slowly, "but it is dangerous. You do not know the world in which you stand." "I know more than you think," Lyra replied softly, yet firmly. Elric could see the subtle shifts in his father's expression. Kaelin was not used to being challenged, not by his son and certainly not by an Omega. Yet something in Lyra's defiance seemed to draw him in, like the moon pulling the tides. The room held its breath. For a moment the world seemed suspended. Even the wind outside the palace ceased its moaning, as if waiting. Elric stepped forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "Father, perhaps she is right. Not all strength is in obedience." Kaelin's eyes snapped to his son, sharp and calculating. "Do you question me, Elric?" Elric faltered. He felt the weight of the palace, the eyes of the courtiers, and the expectations of the pack pressing down on him. "I only wonder if there is more to strength than what we see." Kaelin's lips twitched, as if fighting a smile or a frown. The silence stretched thick and heavy until the Alpha finally spoke. "Very well, she will remain. But know this, defiance has a price, and I do not forgive easily." Lyra inclined her head, acknowledging the warning but not fear. Elric felt a swell of admiration for her. She had not flinched, not once, and in doing so she had shifted the balance of power, even if only slightly. As the candidates were dismissed, Elric lingered near Lyra. "Why do you not fear him?" he asked quietly. "Fear is for those who wish to survive by submission," she said. "I do not wish to survive in chains." Elric felt a pang of longing in his chest. Her words stirred something within him, a desire for freedom, for honesty, for a world where truth mattered more than power. But he also knew the danger. Kaelin was a storm, and those who defied him often broke under its force. Lyra turned to leave, her gaze holding his for a moment longer. In that brief connection, something passed between them, an unspoken understanding, a recognition of kindred spirits trapped in a cruel game. As the hall emptied, Kaelin watched his son and the Omega from his throne. For the first time in many years, he felt the shadow of uncertainty. The storm outside the palace seemed to echo the turmoil within, and for the first time, he wondered if perhaps the world he had built on fear and strength might be incomplete. Elric, left alone with his thoughts, traced the patterns on the marble floor. He could not stop thinking about Lyra, the way she had stood, the courage in her eyes, the defiance that refused to bow. For the first time, he felt the stirrings of hope. Perhaps strength did not lie only in obedience and power. Perhaps it lay in truth, courage, and the bonds that one chose willingly. And somewhere in the distance, beyond the high walls of the palace, the wind carried a whisper of what was to come. A storm of hearts and power, of fear and longing, was gathering. And Elric, the boy who had always felt small and powerless, would be at the center of it all. For in the kingdom of Valemore, nothing remained the same once the moon chose its witness, and Lyra had already captured its attention. The palace of Valemore never truly slept. Its halls echoed with whispers of power and secrets, even when the sun sank below the horizon. Outside, the cliffs were sharp against the fading light, and the sea roared as if warning the kingdom of the storm brewing within. In these shadows, hearts collided, loyalties were tested, and destinies were quietly rewritten. Prince Elric wandered through the corridors, his fingers brushing along the cool stone walls. He felt restless, as though the ceremony earlier had awakened something within him he could not name. The images of Lyra, her defiance, her courage, her clear gaze, haunted him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her standing in the grand hall, refusing to bow, refusing to yield. Her strength had struck him in a way no candidate had ever done before. He paused at a balcony overlooking the cliffs. The wind whipped his hair across his face, and the scent of salt and stone filled his senses. He had always felt constrained by his disability, by the careful way the world watched him. But now he felt a flicker of something new, curiosity, a longing, a desire to understand what Lyra was hiding beneath her calm exterior. Meanwhile, in the throne room above, Lord Calen stood, silent and still, staring into the shadows of the evening. He had not expected the Omega to resist, yet she had done so with a quiet confidence that unsettled him. Normally, he would crush such defiance without hesitation, but something in her had touched him in ways he did not want to admit. He could not name it yet, but the thought of her, not under his control, gnawed at him. That evening, a private gathering was held in the palace library. The walls were lined with ancient tomes, their spines worn and cracked. The flickering candlelight created moving shadows that danced across the vaulted ceiling. Calen summoned Elric, and with him he brought Lyra. "You will remain in Valemore," Calen said, his voice measured and low, "for as long as I deem necessary. You may not leave the palace, nor refuse to appear when summoned. Consider this a test." Lyra bowed her head slightly, not in submission but in acknowledgement. "I understand," she said softly, "but do not mistake my obedience for loyalty. I will act according to my own honor." Calen's eyes narrowed. "Your courage is noted, but remember, defiance has a price. You will see the consequences if you choose to ignore my commands." Elric stepped forward, his hands tucked nervously into his sleeves. "Father," he said cautiously, perhaps you should see the strength she carries in her heart. There is more to leadership than obedience." Calen's gaze snapped to him. For a moment the Alpha's rigid mask wavered. "Do you question me, Elric?" "I do not question your power," Elric said carefully. "I only wonder if someone like her could show you a different kind of strength." Calen's lips pressed into a thin line. He wanted to dismiss the conversation, to remind his son of his place. Yet a part of him, the part that had grown tired of control, of always winning, paused. The rest of the night passed in silence, broken only by the occasional clatter of servants in the halls and the soft murmur of the sea. But Elric could not sleep. He wandered the corridors until he found Lyra standing beneath a high archway, gazing at the stars beyond the palace walls. "You should rest," he said softly. Lyra shook her head. "Rest is for those who obey without thought." "I cannot rest while I am expected to bow where I do not wish to kneel." Elric studied her. "I admire your courage. Most would have already submitted, fearing Calen's wrath. But you do not. How can you be so brave?" Lyra turned to him, her eyes reflecting the moonlight. Bravery is not the absence of fear, she said. It is acting even when fear is present, and I have learned fear is not my master. Elric felt a warmth in his chest he could not name. He had spent his life watching others perform their duties, bending to expectations, hiding their true selves. Yet Lyra seemed unafraid of the world or of him. He wanted to know her better, to understand the strength that allowed her to stand so tall in the presence of power. Days passed, and the palace settled into a rhythm of study and observation. Kalen continued his scrutiny, demanding that Lyra prove her worth in small tasks, tests of patience, intelligence, and loyalty. The Alpha watched her closely, noting every subtle reaction, every flicker of emotion. He could not ignore the effect she had on the court, nor on his son. Elric, meanwhile, began spending more time with her in secret. They wandered the palace gardens, hidden from the Alpha's watchful eyes. They spoke of the world beyond the cliffs, of distant lands, of stories and legends. Lyra's laughter, quiet but bright, filled the spaces between the marble walls and heavy curtains. And each time she spoke, Elric felt the stirrings of something he had never known, a friendship, a bond, and perhaps, in time, something more. "You do not fear him," Elric said one evening, his voice a whisper among the rustling leaves. "Even when he commands, even when he threatens. How can you remain so calm?" Lyra's gaze softened. "Because fear gives power to those who wield it. I will not give him mine, but that does not mean I am without worry." She paused, then smiled faintly. "It is a careful balance." "A dance with shadows." Elric nodded slowly. He had always known the palace was full of shadows, but until now he had never understood the courage it took to move within them freely. Yet, even as trust grew between them, tension simmered. Kalen's attention never wavered, his presence a constant, silent threat. He began to test Lyra in ways subtle yet pointed, placing obstacles in her path, observing how she reacted under pressure. Each time she met his scrutiny with calm defiance, never revealing weakness, never giving him satisfaction. Kalen's fascination with her grew. It was dangerous, unwise even, yet he could not look away. The Alpha, who had always controlled the hearts of others, now found himself confronting a force he could not bend to his will. And in this, he glimpsed a truth he had long ignored. Perhaps power was not always about dominance. Perhaps some strength came from resistance. One night the moon was full and silver upon the palace walls. Elric found Lyra in the highest tower, gazing out over the cliffs where waves crashed like thunder. "The sea is wild tonight," he said softly, joining her side. Lyra's eyes did not leave the horizon. "It reflects the heart of Valemore," she said, "fierce, untamed, and unforgiving. Yet even in storms there is beauty, even in power there is truth waiting to be seen." Elric swallowed hard. You see things differently." "I never imagined anyone could look at this place and not be afraid." Lyra finally turned to him, her gaze steady. "Fear is easy," she said. "It is obedience that is hard. To stand without yielding, that requires courage. And you have more courage than you know, Elric." The word struck him deeply. He had spent years hiding behind careful manners and measured steps, believing that weakness would protect him. Yet here was someone seeing beyond the surface, recognizing his inner strength. But as the moment hung between them, a shadow fell across the doorway. Kalen stepped forward, silent and imposing. The Alpha's presence filled the tower, a weight pressing against the air. "Elric," Kalen said, his voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of steel. "You have spent too much time with her. Do not forget your place." Elric's chest tightened. He had feared this confrontation, yet a part of him refused to retreat. "I have not forgotten," he said quietly, "but perhaps strength does not belong to one person alone. Perhaps courage grows when it is shared." Kalen's eyes, dark and unyielding, studied him for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded, not approval but acknowledgement. A silent warning lingered between them. The game was far from over. Lyra, sensing the tension, stepped back slightly, her calm resolve never faltering. She did not fear Kaelin, nor did she flinch. In that, Elric felt admiration swelling into something he could not name. And Kaelin, though he would not admit it, felt a stir of unease and fascination. As the night deepened, the three stood together in silence, the moon casting silver light on the stone floor. Outside, the wind carried the sound of the restless sea, a reminder that the world beyond the palace walls was wild and unpredictable. And within those walls, hearts and destinies were quietly colliding. Elric knew the path ahead would be difficult. His loyalty to his father, his growing bond with Lyra, and the Alpha's unpredictable moods created a delicate balance, one misstep away from disaster. Yet for the first time in his life, he felt alive. For the first time, he felt that perhaps the future could be more than duty and fear. Perhaps it could be courage and truth and connection. And somewhere in the darkness of the palace, Kaelin watched and wondered. He had ruled for many years, his strength unchallenged, his word law. Yet Lyra's presence stirred something unfamiliar in him, a shadow of longing, a spark of change. The storm of hearts, power, and choice was only beginning. For in Valemore, even the Alpha could not ignore the pull of courage, the weight of defiance, and the quiet power of a heart that refused to yield. And Lyra had already begun to change everything. The palace of Valemore seemed heavier now. Shadows gathered in the corners of halls that had once been bright with candlelight, and the walls whispered of secrets that had long been buried. Storm clouds pressed against the sky, reflecting the tension within the kingdom. Kaelin, the Alpha, moved through the corridors with a calculated grace, but even he could feel the shift in the air. A storm not of the sea, but of hearts and loyalties, of courage and defiance. Prince Elric walked quietly behind the heavy wooden doors of the training courtyard, his mind troubled. The ceremony had passed, the candidates dismissed, yet the tension that Lyra had brought into the palace had not. It lingered like mist, filling every hall, every chamber, every shadowed space. He found Lyra standing near the stone fountain, her gaze fixed on the silver reflection of the moon in the water. The wind tugged at her hair, but she did not move. Even in stillness, there was a presence about her that commanded attention, a silent strength that drew him closer without force. "You shouldn't wander here alone," Elric said softly, stepping beside her. "Kaelin, he watches everything, even now." Lyra's lips curved into a faint smile. "That is the Alpha's way, to watch, to control, to dominate. But observation is not influence. Even he cannot control what I choose to do within my own heart." Elric studied her, marveling at the clarity in her voice. She spoke not from defiance alone, but from understanding, a wisdom that seemed older than her years. "And yet he tests you. He will push until he finds a crack. Everyone does." Lyra's gaze met his, steady and unwavering. "Then I will not give him one." Elric felt a stir of admiration and a pang of worry. Her courage was magnetic, yet dangerous in a palace where power was law, and disobedience often came with consequences. He wanted to protect her, but he was powerless in ways he had never been before. Their conversation was interrupted by the echo of footsteps on the stone path. Kaelin appeared, tall and imposing, his presence heavy as a shadow over the courtyard. He watched Lyra for a long moment, his eyes sharp, calculating. Then he turned to Elric, his voice calm but edged with warning. "Do you enjoy these conversations, Elric?" Kaelin asked. "Do you take pleasure in encouraging defiance?" Elric's heart pounded. "I do not encourage defiance. I only see truth," he said carefully. "Strength can exist without fear, Father, perhaps even in those you consider unworthy." Kaelin's gaze darkened, yet there was a glimmer of something Elric could not name, a shadow of curiosity, perhaps even admiration. "You speak as though the world is not shaped by obedience, by loyalty. Beware, Elric, idealism is a dangerous companion." Lyra stepped forward, her voice soft but unwavering. "Idealism is not weakness. It is vision, and it is courage." The pack will live on, not through fear, but through those willing to see beyond the walls you build. Kalen's expression tightened. For a moment, the alpha's composure faltered. No one had ever spoken to him this way, not with such clarity, such calm defiance. He felt a strange pull, a force he could not dominate, and for the first time in years, he wondered what it might mean to lose control. The tension in the courtyard thickened, broken only by the distant rumble of thunder. The storm outside mirrored the storm within, the battle of wills, of hearts, of power and resistance. Elric's thoughts returned to the secret he had discovered in the palace archives, an old prophecy, a warning etched into the scrolls of Valemore. It spoke of a curse upon the Alpha line, a shadow that would awaken when pride and cruelty grew too strong. The prophecy had remained hidden, buried by generations of fear, yet now he saw its relevance. Kalen's desire for control, his obsession with strength, had set the conditions for its awakening. And Lyra, she might be the key to either breaking it or deepening its hold. Days turned into nights filled with study and whispered conversations. Elric and Lyra continued their secret meetings, learning more about each other and the palace. They explored the ancient gardens, where statues of wolves, symbols of the pack, stood with teeth bared and eyes cold. Among them they spoke of life beyond the palace walls, of freedom, of the world as it could be. "You are different from the others," Elric said one night, leaning against the marble fountain. "You do not seek power for its own sake. You do not bend to fear. Why?" Lyra's eyes reflected the moonlight. "Because I know that power without truth is meaningless. The pack does not survive on fear alone. And you understand that, even if you are afraid to admit it." Elric felt the weight of her words. He had spent his life under the shadow of his father's expectations, trying to appear strong while hiding what he felt. Now, with her, he felt unburdened, yet aware of the danger that surrounded them. The Alpha, Kalen, watched from the shadows more than once, unable to resist the pull Lyra had over both his son and the palace itself. He tested her subtly, sending tasks that were impossible to complete without intelligence and resilience. Each time she succeeded quietly, without complaint, and each time Kalen felt a strange mixture of frustration and admiration. One evening, Kalen summoned both Elric and Lyra to the Hall of Ancestors, a long chamber lined with statues of past alphas. The air was thick with the scent of aged stone and candle wax. The alpha's voice echoed as he spoke. "Tonight, you will face a trial, a demonstration of loyalty, courage, and wisdom. You will walk the path of the past, confronting the shadows that linger in our lineage. Fail, and the consequences will be yours to bear." Elric's heart thudded. The Hall of Ancestors was sacred, a place no one entered lightly. It was said that the spirits of past alphas watched all who passed through, testing their intentions and hearts. To be summoned here was a rare and dangerous honor. Lyra inclined her head slightly. "We accept," she said calmly. The trial began with the closing of the great doors behind them. The hall was dim, lit only by flickering torches that cast shadows like living creatures along the walls. Whispers of old alphas seemed to echo, carrying warnings and advice in tones both gentle and harsh. Elric felt a shiver pass down his spine. He had never believed in ghosts, yet the weight of history pressed upon him. Lyra's hand brushed against his, and he felt warmth and reassurance. Her courage steadied him, gave him strength he had not known he possessed. The path wound deeper into the hall, leading them to challenges of mind and heart. Puzzles of loyalty, tests of integrity, and visions of the past confronted them. Each trial revealed a truth about their own hearts, forcing them to face fears and desires long hidden. At one point, a vision showed Kalen, not as the Alpha, but as a boy, broken and lonely, burdened by the expectations of power. Elric saw the pain his father carried, the fears he had buried beneath anger and control. And for the first time, he understood that his father's cruelty was not born of malice alone, but of fear, fear of weakness, fear of loss, fear of failing the pack. Lyra's gaze met his, steady and reassuring. "Even the strongest can be afraid," she whispered. "And courage is not the absence of fear. It is moving forward despite it." The final trial tested them in a way they had not expected. A spectral wolf, fierce and silent, appeared, representing the curse of the Alpha line. Its eyes glowed red, and it advanced with the weight of generations, of pride and cruelty. Elric felt its presence in his chest, a pressure that threatened to overwhelm him. Lyra stepped forward, her own fear hidden behind calm determination. "We do not fight alone," she said, placing a hand on Elric's shoulder. "Together, we are stronger." Elric closed his eyes, drawing upon the courage she had inspired in him. He reached within himself, finding a spark of power he had never realized he possessed, a bond of spirit and will that connected him to Lyra and to the truth of his heart. Together, they faced the wolf. The spectral beast roared, and a burst of light erupted from their joined will, scattering the shadows and forcing the wolf to retreat. The hall trembled and the torches flickered wildly, yet when the light faded, only the two of them stood, unharmed, their hearts racing. Kalen appeared at the entrance, silent and imposing. His eyes, dark as ever, held something new, a recognition and perhaps even respect. "You have passed the trial," he said slowly. "Not by obedience, not by fear, but by courage and truth. Perhaps there is more to strength than I understood." Elric felt a surge of relief, yet he knew this was only the beginning. The curse, though challenged, had not been fully lifted. And Kalen had changed, if only slightly, his heart touched by the courage of those he had never expected to teach him. Lyra turned to him, her hand brushing his lightly. "This is only the beginning," she said softly. "The path ahead will be more dangerous, but we will face it together." Elric nodded, feeling for the first time that he was not merely a pawn in the Alpha's games, but a participant in shaping the future. And Kalen, the Alpha who had ruled with fear and strength, now faced the quiet truth that the world might demand something more than control. Outside, the storm broke, rain falling in sheets against the palace walls. Thunder rolled across the cliffs, and lightning lit the sky, a mirror of the turmoil and change within. The kingdom of Valemore had shifted, and the hearts of those within its walls were no longer the same. A storm had come not only to the skies, but to the hearts of the Alpha, the Prince, and the Omega. And in its aftermath, the first sparks of a new era had begun to glow. The storm had passed, leaving the kingdom of Valemore wet and glistening under a pale morning sun. The cliffs shimmered as drops of rain clung to jagged rocks, and the sea roared more gently now, as if satisfied with its display of power. But inside the palace, the tension remained. Hearts were restless, minds sharp, and the air heavy with unspoken questions. Prince Elric stood on the balcony overlooking the cliffs. His dark hair clung to his forehead from the rain, and his hands rested on the cold stone railing. The events of the past days weighed on him. The trial in the Hall of Ancestors, the awakening of the Alpha curse, and the bond he had formed with Lyra, these had changed everything. He was no longer the boy who had hidden behind careful steps and quiet observation. He felt alive, but the path ahead was uncertain and dangerous. Lyra approached quietly, her footsteps soft against the stone floor. She leaned beside him, her eyes reflecting the silver light of the morning. "The storm has passed," she said, "but not the darkness. There are still choices to be made and truths to face." Elric nodded. "I know, the curse, the prophecy, it is more than I understood. And Kalen, he is changing. I can see it, but I do not know if he can change completely." Lyra's gaze softened. "People can change when they face themselves, even him, but it will take courage, honesty, and surrender, not to another, but to his own heart." The palace stirred behind them as Kalen emerged from the shadows, his dark cloak dripping from the remnants of the storm. His eyes, usually sharp and commanding, now carried the weight of reflection. The Alpha stood silently beside them, the power he wielded undeniable, yet tempered by a new awareness. "You have both passed the trials," Kalen said finally, his voice deep and controlled. "But there is one final choice to be made. The curse of Valemore is not merely a legend. It is a shadow that feeds on pride, cruelty, and fear. To break it, someone must act with courage, without thought of reward, without yielding to fear or desire." Elric's pulse quickened. He understood the gravity of the moment. He looked at Lyra, who met his gaze without hesitation. Together, they had faced tests of mind, heart, and spirit, but this was the culmination. Kalen continued, his eyes on them both. "The pack is at risk. The line of alphas has been haunted for generations. The curse can either be broken, or it can claim all who dwell within these walls. The choice lies before you. Courage alone is not enough. It must be guided by truth and compassion." Lyra stepped forward, placing her hand on Elric's arm. "We face it together," she said. "Whatever comes, we will not fail if we act with honesty and strength." Elric nodded, feeling the courage within him ignite. The vision of the spectral wolf from the Hall of Ancestors returned to his mind, its red eyes blazing, a symbol of the curse that lingered in Kalen's line. He knew now that the only way to confront it was not through fear, obedience, or power, but through connection, understanding, and sacrifice of ego. They entered the great hall, where Kalen had summoned the court and the pack. The torches flickered, casting long shadows along the stone walls, and the air was thick with anticipation. Courtiers and warriors alike watched silently, knowing something monumental was about to unfold. Kalen raised his hand, commanding attention. "Tonight," he said, "we confront the curse that has haunted Valemore. All must witness the truth, for what is done here will shape the future of the pack." Elric felt Lyra's hand tighten around his. Together they stepped forward, their hearts aligned in purpose. The curse, an invisible force that had lingered for generations, began to manifest as a cold wind that swept through the hall. Shadows moved along the walls, forming shapes of past alphas, their eyes filled with sorrow, anger, and longing. Kalen watched, his normally unshakable demeanor faltering slightly. "It is stronger than I imagined," he muttered under his breath. The Alpha had ruled with control and fear for decades, yet even he could not fully command what had been sown through generations of pride and dominance. Elric closed his eyes, drawing on the bond he shared with Lyra. Together they focused on the truth within their hearts, the courage to face fear, the honesty to confront what was wrong, and the compassion to forgive past sins. A warm light began to glow around them, faint at first, then growing stronger with each heartbeat, filling the hall with a quiet, steady warmth. The shadows recoiled, their howls echoing through the stone corridors, and the wind stilled. Kalen took a step forward, watching in awe as the curse itself seemed to hesitate, as though sensing the purity of their intentions. "Do not falter," Lyra whispered. "Trust the strength within yourself and the bond we share." Elric nodded, and together they advanced further into the heart of the hall. The light grew brighter, radiating from them, reaching into the darkest corners of the palace, the very stones and the echoes of the past. The spectral wolf appeared once more, but this time it was different, its red eyes softening, its form less threatening, reflecting not malice but pain, sorrow, and longing. "You have found the heart of the curse," Kalen said, his voice hushed. "And yet, only one choice remains. Sacrifice is not death, but surrendering the pride and fear that have ruled you." Elric and Lyra looked at each other, understanding the depth of the task. The curse fed on fear and control. To break it, Kalen would need to confront himself, to acknowledge the pain he had caused and the vulnerabilities he had hidden for so long. Kalen stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the spectral wolf. He inhaled deeply, feeling the centuries of fear, pride, and cruelty within himself. And then, for the first time, he lowered his defenses, not in weakness but in acceptance. He faced the shadow with honesty, acknowledging his past misdeeds, his mistakes, and his desires. A tremor passed through the hall as the wolf's form softened completely, dissolving into the light that Elric and Lyra carried. The wind stilled, the torches burned steadily, and silence reigned, profound and complete. The curse was broken not by dominance nor by fear, but by courage, truth, and compassion. Elric felt the warmth of victory, yet it was tempered by awe. They had faced not just a mystical curse, but the weight of generations of pride and pain. And Kalen, his father, the Alpha, stood changed before them, humbled and aware, no longer the unyielding force he had been. Kalen turned to Elric and Lyra, his voice softer than it had ever been. "You have done what I could not. You have shown me a strength beyond power, beyond fear, and in doing so, you have given me a chance to be more than I was." Lyra inclined her head, her eyes warm. Strength is not in ruling alone. It is in understanding, in connection, and in the courage to face the truth within yourself. Kalen nodded, his gaze lingering on Lyra for a moment longer than he expected. He had been fascinated by her from the first day, but now he understood why, not merely because of defiance, but because she had shown the path to redemption. Elric stepped closer to her, his hand brushing against hers. "We faced it together," he said softly. "And together we can shape what comes next." Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, illuminating the palace in a golden glow. The sea sparkled, the cliffs glistened, and the kingdom seemed to breathe again, freed from the shadows of the past. The storm had passed, but more importantly, the storm within hearts and minds had found its resolution. Kalen, now humbled and reflective, watched his son and Lyra. He had ruled with fear for decades, but now he understood the power of compassion, of guidance, and of trust. The pack would survive, not through intimidation, but through leaders who faced themselves honestly and acted with integrity. Elric looked at his father, then at Lyra, and felt a surge of hope. He had grown from a boy burdened by expectations into a young man capable of courage, wisdom, and leadership. And Lyra, her bond with him had been the spark that ignited his growth, her courage the mirror that reflected his own potential. As the palace doors opened to the bright morning, the pack gathered outside, sensing the change within their leaders. Whispers of awe and respect spread through the crowd, for they felt the shift, the renewal of Valemore, and the hope of a future built not on fear, but on understanding and choice. Kalen finally spoke, his voice strong yet softened by newfound humility. "The curse is broken, the pack is safe, and a new era begins. Let this be a lesson: strength without compassion is hollow, and courage, true courage, lies in facing the truth within your heart." Elric and Lyra shared a quiet smile, their hands brushing together, a promise of trust, partnership, and perhaps love. They had faced darkness, fear, and power, and had emerged not only victorious but transformed. The kingdom of Valemore, once shadowed by centuries of fear, now shone with the promise of renewal. And as the sun climbed higher, lighting the cliffs, the palace, and the hearts within, one truth became clear. The bonds we choose, the courage we embrace, and the love we nurture can break even the oldest curses and transform even the most unyielding hearts. And in that light, Prince Elric and Lyra together stepped forward, not as pawns of fate but as architects of a new destiny.